People tell you that rock bottom has a thud. That's a lie. It doesn't sound like a heavy book dropping to the floor or a judge's gavel striking wood. Rock bottom has a high-pitched whine. It sounds like metal eating into metal. It sounds like a drill. I stood in the hallway of the house my husband bought in 1982, clutching the lapels of my cardigan together, listening to the locksmith bore through the deadbolt of my front door. The sound was a scream, mechanical and relentless, vibrating through the oak frame and into the floorboards beneath my slippers. Outside, the Portland rain was doing what it always does in November, hammering against the siding, a gray, wet curtain trying to wash us all away. But the drill was louder. Zzz, click. The noise stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, wet, and cold. The door swung open. Standing on the porch, water dripping from the brim of his raincoat, was a man I didn't know. He held a clipboard. Behind him was the locksmith packing his tools, and behind them, standing near the railing, refusing to look at me, was Mark. My golden boy. He was staring at his shoes, those Italian loafers that cost more than my monthly pension. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe the guilt was just a heavy coat he couldn't take off. "Mrs. Clark?" the man with the clipboard said. He didn't look me in the eye either. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We need you to vacate the premises. The new owner has taken possession." I looked past the stranger. I looked right at my son. "Mark," I whispered. My voice was a ghost, thin and breaking. "Mark, tell them." Mark turned his head. He looked at the wet lawn. He looked at the sky. He looked everywhere but at his mother. That was the moment the drill stopped, but the hole in my chest opened up. Let's go back. Not far, just 90 days, before the drill, before the silence. If you've never lived in an old colonial in the Pacific Northwest during the autumn, you don't know what true dampness is. It's not just water, it's a presence. It seeps into the drywall, it swells the door frames until they stick, and it settles in your joints. I am a retired history teacher. My life has been dedicated to facts, to dates, to the immutable truth of what happened. But for the last year, I had been living a fiction. The fiction was that I was fine. The reality was a stack of envelopes on the kitchen counter. I had a system. I would wake up at 6 a.m. before the neighbors were awake, and I would walk down the driveway to the mailbox. I couldn't bear the thought of Mrs. Higgins next door seeing the red stamps. Final notice, past due, action required. I treated them like radioactive material. I brought them inside, closed the blinds, and performed surgery. I would steam them open, read the numbers that made my heart flutter like a trapped bird, and then I would shred them. Not in the garbage, oh no. I dissolved them in water in the kitchen sink until they were pulp, then flushed them. Shame is a powerful architect. It builds walls where there were once doors. The house was too big. That was the fact I refused to teach myself. Since David passed 5 years ago, the silence in the hallways had grown teeth. The heating bill alone was eating half my Social Security check. I had stopped heating the upstairs. I slept in the guest room downstairs, pretending it was cozy, not pathetic. I sat at the kitchen table, the wood cold against my forearms. The kettle began to whistle, a shrill, demanding sound. I had $300 in my checking account. The property tax bill was $4,000. It was due in 2 weeks. I poured the tea. It smelled of bergamot and impending disaster. I wrapped my hands around the mug, trying to steal its warmth. I was drowning in plain sight behind manicured hedges and a freshly painted front door. The sound of a car engine on my driveway was rare enough to make me jump. It wasn't the mailman's truck. It was a low, throaty purr, a predator's purr. I pulled back the lace curtain. A silver Lexus, sleek as a bullet, was idling in the rain. The driver's door opened, and Mark stepped out. He didn't run through the rain, he walked through it, as if he had an arrangement with the clouds. He was 42, but in that light he looked 25 again, tall, broad-shouldered, with that thick hair that refused to gray. My heart leapt. It's a biological reflex, I think. A mother sees her child and the chemicals of joy flood the system before the brain can ask questions. I opened the door before he could knock. "Mom," he said. His voice was warm syrup. You look great." He hugged me. He smelled of rain, expensive leather, and a cologne that was sharp and metallic, sandalwood and ambition. But when he pulled away, I saw it. Mothers see the stitches, not just the garment. His shirt was charcoal, beautifully cut, but the cuffs of his shirt were slightly frayed, just a few threads unraveling at the wrist. And his eyes? They were moving too fast, scanning the hallway, scanning the pile of mail I hadn't hidden yet, scanning me. "Mark," I said, ushering him in, "I didn't know you were coming. I would have made a roast." "I was in the neighborhood, Mom. Business. High-level stuff, downtown." He laughed, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes. It stopped at his mouth. We sat in the living room. The house felt colder with him in it, oddly. He brought a restless energy that made the stillness of the room feel accusatory. He declined tea. He paced. Finally, he stopped by the fireplace and turned to me. "Mom, we need to talk about the house." My stomach dropped. "The house? What about it?" "I know, Mom," he said softly. He walked over and knelt beside my chair. He took my hands. His palms were clammy. "I know about the taxes. I know about the liens." I tried to pull my hands away, stung by the humiliation, but he held tight. "How?" I whispered. "Public records, Mom. It's all online. Anyone can see it. Mrs. Higgins can see it." The mention of the neighbor was a precision strike. He knew my vanity. He knew my pride. "I can handle it," I lied. "It's just a cash flow issue. The pension isn't enough," he interrupted, his voice gentle, reasonable. "Listen to me, Mom. The state is aggressive right now. They're seizing assets from seniors left and right. It's a racket. If you miss that tax payment, they won't just fine you, they'll put a lien on the deed. Eventually, they'll auction it off on the courthouse steps for pennies." I felt the blood drain from my face. The image of my home, David's legacy, being sold to strangers on a wet sidewalk was too much. "What do I do?" I asked. I was no longer the history teacher. I was the student. Mark smiled. It was the smile he used when he broke the neighbor's window with a baseball in 1992, the "I can fix this" smile. He said, "We protect the asset." He reached into his briefcase, fine leather but scuffed at the corners, and pulled out a folder. "I've been working with my attorneys on a family trust structure. It's what the wealthy do, Mom. We move the title out of your name, just technically. We put it into a protected status under my management. You wanted me to sell you the house. No, God, no. No money changes hands. It's a quitclaim deed. It just shifts the burden. I take on the liability. I pay the taxes. I handle the maintenance. You just live here. You change nothing. But on paper, the state can't touch you because you don't own it." He squeezed my hands. "He wants to do this for you, Mom. Let me carry the weight. Dad would have wanted me to step up." He played the dad card. He laid it down on the table like a royal flush. I looked at his frayed cuff. I looked at his desperate eyes. I thought I saw love. I thought I saw a son trying to be the man his father was. I didn't see the wolf. I only saw the fur. "Okay," I said. "Okay, Mark." The bank smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a sterile, air-conditioned purgatory. The fluorescent lights hummed, a low buzzing sound that seemed to drill into my temples. We sat across from a notary named Miss Rodriguez. She was young, perhaps late 20s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind thick glasses. She reminded me of the students who used to sit in the front row of my AP history class, the ones who actually read the footnotes. Mark was vibrating. He was tapping his foot, a rapid thump-thump-thump against the carpet. He was charming the air out of the room, joking with the bank manager, complimenting Miss Rodriguez on her blouse. Miss Rodriguez wasn't smiling. She had the document in front of her. Quitclaim Deed. The words looked bold and aggressive on the white paper. "Mrs. Clark?" she said. Her voice was professional, but there was a hitch in it, a pause. She looked at Mark, then locked eyes with me. "I need to verify that you understand the nature of this document." "It's for asset protection," I said, repeating the phrase Mark had taught me in the car, "to keep the state away." Miss Rodriguez frowned. She adjusted her glasses. "Mrs. Clark, this is a full transfer of title. You are granting 100% of your interest in the property to Mr. Mark Clark. Once you sign this, you have no legal claim to the home. You are not on the title anymore. It is irreversible." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mom knows the details," Mark said quickly. His charm had developed a hard edge. "We've discussed it with our family attorney. It's a standard intra-family transfer." Miss Rodriguez ignored him. She kept looking at me. She was throwing me a rope. I could see it. She was begging me to grab it. "Mrs. Clark, are you receiving any compensation for this transfer?" "No, he's my son. He's taking care of me." "He's taking care of the taxes," Mark corrected, his hand resting on my shoulder. His grip was tight, a little too tight. "Mom, we're wasting this nice lady's time. We have that lunch reservation." I looked at the paper, then I looked up at Mark. He smiled. It wasn't the wolf smile. It was the 10-year-old boy holding up a drawing he made for me. It was pure, distilled innocence. "Trust me, Mom," he mouthed. I was lonely. I was scared of the red envelopes. I wanted to believe that my son was a hero. "I'm ready," I told Miss Rodriguez. She hesitated for one more second, a second that lasted an eternity, and then slid the paper toward me. I picked at the pen. It was a cheap blue stick pen. It felt cold. I signed, "Evelyn Marie Clark." Miss Rodriguez took the paper back. She picked up her stamp. Ka-chunk! The sound was wet and heavy. It sounded like a guillotine blade hitting the block. It was done. I had just given away $400,000 of equity, my memories, and my safety net for the price of a smile. Mark took me to a steakhouse near the river. It was dark, expensive, and smelled of charred meat and red wine. He ordered a bottle of Cabernet that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He was expansive, loud, filling the booth with his presence. He ordered the ribeye. I ordered a salad. My stomach was in knots, though I told myself it was relief. "To the future," Mark toasted, clinking his glasses against mine. The crystal sang. "To the future," I echoed. "I feel lighter, Mark. Thank you." "I told you, Mom. I got you." He took a sip of wine, and then his phone, sitting face up on the white tablecloth, buzzed. Mark glanced at it. He frowned. He swiped the call away. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just business, associates. They know I'm closing a big deal. They get impatient." The phone buzzed again, long, angry vibrations that rattled the silverware. Mark's jaw tightened. A muscle in his cheek twitched. He flipped the phone face down. "Ignore it," he said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. Red juice ran onto the white plate. "Let's focus on us, on the house. I'm going to fix the roof next month, and the gutters." "That would be wonderful," I said. The phone vibrated against the wood of the table, muffled now but persistent, like a heartbeat under the floorboards. Mark wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the phone, and for a split second the mask slipped. I didn't see the successful businessman. I saw fear, stark, animal panic. But then he looked up, smiled that golden smile, and the fear vanished. "Eat up, Mom," he said. "It's a celebration." I took a bite of lettuce. It tasted like nothing. I didn't know then that the phone calls weren't from business partners. They were collectors. They were from the sharks Mark had been swimming with. And I didn't know that the big deal he was closing wasn't a merger. It was me. I had just signed my own eviction notice, and I was sitting there, thanking him for the pen. Silence has a texture. In an old house, it usually feels like velvet, dusty, soft, familiar. But in the 3 months after I signed the deed, the silence in my home changed. It became brittle. It felt like thin ice stretching over a deep black lake. Mark had called it a formality, a shield, but shields are supposed to make you feel safe. Instead, I felt like I was living in a museum exhibit of my own life. I walked through the rooms, touching the wainscoting, and the wood felt indifferent to me. He stopped coming by. At first, it was subtle. The Sunday dinners were canceled via text message. Big merger. Sorry, Mom. Next week. Then the texts became shorter. Swamped. Love you. Then nothing. Just the 3 dots of a typing indicator that would appear and vanish, leaving no message behind. The rain in Portland didn't stop, it just changed tempo. Sometimes it was a mist that clung to your eyelashes. Other times it was a drum solo on the roof. It was a Tuesday when the texture of the silence shattered. I was at the mailbox, my old enemy. I had stopped fearing it because Mark had promised the red envelopes would stop. And they had. The tax notices had vanished. But that morning, amidst the grocery flyers and a coupon for gutter cleaning, there was a thick, heavy envelope. It wasn't from the bank. It wasn't from the county. The return address read, Ironclad Lending Solutions, LLC. The name sounded aggressive, industrial. I brought it into the kitchen. The linoleum was cold through my socks. I didn't steam this one open. I tore it. The sound of the ripping paper was loud in the empty house. I pulled out the letter. It wasn't on the polite, watermarked stationery of a traditional bank. The paper was cheap, bright white, and the font was jagged. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. My glasses slipped down my nose. I pushed them back up, my fingers trembling. I read it again. Collateral property at 42 Elm Street. Borrower, Mark Anthony Clark. Principal balance, $215,000. Interest rate, 18%. The numbers swam before my eyes. $215,000. Mark hadn't just transferred the title to protect the house. He had used the house as an ATM. He had gone to a hard money lender, the kind that advertises on telephone poles and late-night cable, and he had drained every drop of equity my husband and I had built over 40 years. And he hadn't paid a dime. The letter said the loan was 90 days delinquent. He had taken the money in cash the week after we went to the notary, and he had simply walked away. I sat down. The chair scraped against the floor, a sound like a bone breaking. "Mark," I whispered to the empty room, "what have you done?" I dialed his number. It rang and rang and rang. Then his voice, bright, confident, professional. "You've reached Mark Clark. I'm closing a deal right now, but leave a message." "Mark," I said into the phone. My voice sounded wet. "Mark, there's a letter from a company called Ironclad. They say they owe you. They say they're taking the house. Call me, please, God, call me." He didn't call. For 2 days, I lived in a state of vibrating panic. I paced the floor. I watched the driveway. Every car that passed slowed my heart. Then came the truck. It was Thursday afternoon. The sky was the color of a bruised plum. A white pickup truck, rusted around the wheel wells, pulled up onto the curb, 2 tires on my grass, and a man got out. He was wearing a neon yellow vest and smoking a cigarette. He walked to the back of the truck and pulled out a sledgehammer and a wooden post. I watched through the window, paralyzed. It felt like watching a burglary in slow motion, except he wasn't taking anything out. He was putting something in. He walked to the center of the lawn, right in the middle of David's prize-winning hydrangeas, now brown and dormant, and swung the hammer. Thwack! The sound hit me in the stomach. Thwack! He was driving a stake in the heart of my life. I moved then. I didn't think, I just moved. I ran to the front door, fumbled with the latch, and burst out into the rain. I wasn't wearing a coat. The cold water hit me instantly, soaking my blouse, plastering my gray hair to my skull. "Stop!" I screamed. "Stop it! What are you doing?" The man looked up, startled. He had the post driven deep into the soft, wet earth. He was attaching a sign to it with a cordless drill. "For sale by owner, cash only, motivated seller," and at the bottom, in big, bold red numbers, Mark's cell phone number. "You can't do that!" I yelled, rushing at him. I grabbed the wooden post with both hands. The wood was rough and splintery. "This is my house! Get off my property!" "Lady, hey, easy," the man said, stepping back, holding his drill like a weapon. "I just got paid to put the sign up. Talk to the guy on the number." "I am talking to you!" I shrieked. I pulled at the sign. I planted my feet in the mud and pulled. I am 74 years old. I have arthritis in my knuckles, but rage is a powerful anesthetic. The post wouldn't budge. The mud sucked at my slippers. I slipped, my knee hitting the wet grass. The cold seeped instantly into my bones, but I didn't let go. I clawed at the sign, my fingernails scraping against the painted wood. "It's my house! It's not for sale! It's not for sale!" The man looked at me, a grandmother on her knees in the mud, destroying a $20 sign. He didn't look angry. He looked pitying. That was worse. "I'm just doing a job, ma'am," he mumbled. He threw his cigarette into a puddle, got in his truck, and drove away. I stayed there in the rain, hugging the post, the for sale sign looming over me like a tombstone. Thanksgiving arrived like a funeral procession. I had always hosted Thanksgiving. It was the one law of the Clark family universe. David would carve, Mark would complain about the Detroit Lions, and the house would smell of sage and roasting turkey. I cooked. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I performed the ritual, the gods of domesticity would show mercy. Maybe I thought if the house smelled like a home, they couldn't take it away. I roasted a bird. I made the cranberry sauce with the orange zest the way Mark liked it. The table was set for two. The good china, the silver candlesticks. At 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. I smoothed my skirt. I checked my face in the hall mirror. I looked tired, the skin around my eyes like crushed tissue paper, but I looked composed. I opened the door. Mark was there. He looked impeccable. A camel hair coat, a cashmere scarf. He looked like an ad for the American dream. But he wasn't holding a bottle of wine. He wasn't holding flowers. He was standing next to a man in a brown uniform, a sheriff's deputy. My hands went to my throat. "Mark?" Mark didn't step inside. He stayed on the porch, safe in the threshold. He looked at the deputy, then at me. His face was a mask of bored irritation. "Mom," he said, "this is Deputy Miller." "Mrs. Clark," the deputy said. He held out a stack of papers. "I'm sorry to disturb your holiday. I'm serving you with an order of eviction and a writ of possession." The words floated in the air, heavy and nonsensical. "Eviction?" I looked at Mark. "Mark, tell him this is a mistake. Tell him about the trust, the protection." Mark sighed, a long, weary exhalation. "Mom, don't make a scene, please." "A scene? You brought the police to our Thanksgiving dinner." "It's not your dinner, Mom. It's not your house, not anymore." "I signed a paper to protect us." "You signed a quitclaim deed," Mark said, his voice cold and flat. "You transferred title. It's a legal document. You're an educated woman, Mom. You know what a signature means." "But you said—" I stepped onto the porch, reaching for him. You said you would pay the mortgage. You said I could live here. Mark took a step back, avoiding my touch as if I were contagious. Plans changed. The market shifted. I needed the liquidity for a venture. The house was dead capital. It was just sitting there, rotting. Rotting? My voice rose to a scream. This is your father's house. This is where you learned to walk. It's an asset, Mother, Mark snapped. The mask fell completely. His eyes were hard, black flint. It's wood and brick and dirt. Stop romanticizing it. I leveraged it. The deal didn't work out. The lender called the note. It's business. It's just math. I trusted you, I whispered. I am your mother. Mark checked his watch. I found you a room. It's in Gresham, a boarding house. It's paid up for 2 months. Consider it a severance package. He nodded to the deputy. Do what you have to do. Then my son turned his back on me. He walked down the steps, past the muddy hole where the sign had been, and got into his silver Lexus. He didn't look back, not once. The deputy looked at me. He looked at the warm light spilling from the hallway, smelling the turkey I had roasted for a ghost. Ma'am, he said softly, you have 72 hours to vacate. If you're not out, the sheriff's department will have to remove your belongings to the curb. He placed the papers in my hand. They were heavy. I stood in the doorway as the deputy walked away. The rain had started again, a cold, misting drizzle. I looked down at the papers. Notice to vacate. The house behind me was warm. The candles were burning down. The turkey was cooling. I realized then that the burglar I had been so afraid of, the faceless state, the taxman, the nursing home, wasn't the danger. The danger had been the boy I tucked in at night. The danger had a key. I closed the door. I locked it, as if a lock mattered anymore. I slid down the wood of the door until I hit the floor, clutching the eviction notice to my chest, and for the first time in 40 years, the house didn't feel like it was holding me. It felt like it was spitting me out. Rock Bottom, it turns out, is not a place of solitude. It is a crowded waiting room in a legal aid clinic on 82nd Avenue, squeezed between a pawn shop and a liquor store. The air in the clinic was thick, recycled, and smelled aggressively of wet wool, lemon floor cleaner, and human anxiety. I sat on a plastic orange chair that was bolted to the floor. Next to me, a young mother was trying to hush a crying baby. Across the room, a man with tremors was staring at a water stain on the ceiling. We were the discarded, the ones who had fallen through the cracks of the American dream. When my name was finally called, I walked into a cubicle, not an office. The lawyer was a man named Mr. Henderson. He looked exhausted. His tie was loose, his desk was a tectonic plate of files, and he had a coffee stain on his shirt pocket. He didn't look like Perry Mason. He looked like a man who was losing a war, one file at a time. He listened to my story. He looked at the copies of the Quitclaim Deed and the eviction notice. He rubbed his eyes under his glasses. Mrs. Clark, he said, his voice gentle but devoid of hope, I'm going to be honest with you. A quitclaim deed is a nuclear weapon in property law. It's absolute. You didn't lend him the house. You didn't lease it. You gave it voluntarily. But he lied, I said, my hands twisting in my lap. He told me it was a trust. He told me it was for protection. Verbal contracts regarding real estate are unenforceable, Henderson recited, a mantra he had clearly said 1,000 times. Unless we can prove fraud or undue influence, the document stands, and proving fraud in a family transfer, it's nearly impossible. The court assumes you knew what you were doing. So that's it, I asked. I just lose? I lose 40 years of my life because I trusted my son? Henderson looked at the photo of his own kids on his desk. He sighed. "We can file for an emergency injunction to stop the eviction. We can argue you were misled, but I have to warn you, the burden of proof is on us, and it's a heavy burden." The courtroom for the preliminary hearing was nothing like the ones on television. It was small, wood-paneled, and quiet. There was no jury, just a judge, a stern woman with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the opposing counsel. Mark wasn't there. He had sent a lawyer, a sharp-featured man in a suit that cost more than Mr. Henderson's car. The hearing started badly. Mr. Henderson tried to paint the picture: a vulnerable widow, a manipulative son, a complex financial scheme. The judge listened, her face unreadable. Then Mark's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "the plaintiff claims she was coerced. She claims she didn't understand the nature of the gift. We would like to submit Exhibit A, a video taken on the day of the signing." My heart hammered against my ribs. A video? The lawyer pulled out a tablet and walked toward the bench. He pressed play. The sound was amplified through the courtroom speakers. Pop! The sound of a champagne cork. Then laughter. My laughter. The video showed me sitting in the booth at the steakhouse. I was holding a glass of wine. My cheeks were flushed. I looked happy. Mark's voice came from behind the camera. "So, Mom, to the big day. You sure you want to do this? Giving me the keys to the kingdom?" And then, on the screen, I smiled, a wide, trusting, tipsy smile. "Of course, darling. Everything I have is yours. You're the man of the house now." The video ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Mark's lawyer turned to the judge. "Does that look like a woman under duress, Your Honor? Or does it look like a generous mother who simply regrets her gift 3 months later because her son made a business decision she disagrees with?" I felt the blood drain from my body. I remembered that moment. I remembered the wine. I didn't know he was recording. I thought we were celebrating my safety. I didn't know I was recording my own confession. The judge looked at me. Her eyes were cold. "Mrs. Clark, this evidence is compelling. Unless you can show me something more substantial than buyer's remorse, I am inclined to lift the stay of eviction." "Your Honor, request for a 48-hour continuance," Henderson stammered, to review the digital evidence." The judge checked the clock. 48 hours, but you're climbing a glass mountain, counselor." I walked out of the courthouse feeling like a ghost. The rain had turned to a biting sleet. I took the bus back to the boarding house in Gresham. My room was small. It smelled of cabbage and old carpet. I sat on the narrow bed, the video playing in a loop in my mind. "Everything I have is yours." I had said it. I had handed him the knife and told him where to cut. I opened my suitcase. I hadn't unpacked. It felt too permanent. I started digging through the few boxes of papers I had managed to salvage before the lock changed. Old lesson plans, David's death certificate, and then a box of Mark's old things from the garage. I don't know what I was looking for. An answer? A reason? I found a stack of old tax returns from 10 years ago. I found a debate trophy. And then, at the bottom, I found a manila envelope. Inside was a divorce decree, Mark Anthony Clark versus Sarah Jenkins. Sarah. I hadn't thought about her in years. They were married briefly in his late 20s. It had ended badly. Mark had told me she was crazy, paranoid, and obsessive about money. I had believed him. I always believed him. But now, looking at the date, 2014, something clicked. The divorce was finalized just 6 months after Sarah's grandmother died. I remembered Mark driving a new car that year. I remembered him talking about inheritance issues. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking. I searched for Sarah Jenkins, Portland. There were dozens. I narrowed it. Sarah Jenkins, nurse. I remembered she was a nurse. One result, a LinkedIn profile. She worked at Providence Hospital. I called the hospital. I asked for the nurse's station. I didn't expect her to come to the phone, but 5 minutes later a voice said, "This is Sarah." "Sarah?" I said. "This is Evelyn. Evelyn Clark, Mark's mother." There was a silence on the line so long I thought she had hung up, then a sharp intake of breath. "Evelyn," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, it was terrified. "Why are you calling? Is he coming for me again?" "No," I said. "He's not coming for you. He came for me. He took the house, Sarah. He took everything." The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It felt like a door opening. "Meet me," Sarah said. "The diner on Burnside. An hour." Sarah looked older, tired around the eyes, but her gaze was steady. We sat in a booth in the back, huddled over mugs of black coffee. Outside, the Portland bray was unrelenting. I told her everything: the tax lien, the trust, the notary, the loan, the eviction. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. When she finished, she reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a binder. It was thick, organized with color-coded tabs. "I kept it," she said. "Everyone told me to burn it. My therapist, my new husband, they said let it go. But I knew he wouldn't stop." She opened the binder. "This is my grandmother's house in Seattle, 2013. Mark told her the city was going to condemn it because of the foundation. He said he could save it if she put it in a holding LLC in his name." I felt sick. The script was identical. She signed. 2 weeks later, he took out $100,000 against it. He gambled it away on crypto and sports betting. Grandma died in a state-run facility because we couldn't afford home care. He vanished. "Why wasn't he charged?" I asked. "Because it's civil, not criminal. That's what the police said. She signed the papers. It was a family dispute. He's a predator, Evelyn, but he hunts in the gray areas of the law. He hunts where the police can't see." She pushed the binder across the table toward me. "But this," she said, tapping the plastic cover, "this proves it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a business deal gone wrong. It's a pattern. It's a systemic method of defrauding vulnerable women to fund his lifestyle. This makes it fraud." I touched the binder. It felt heavy. It felt like ammunition. "Will you testify?" I asked. Sarah looked out the window at the rain. She looked scared, but then she looked at me, a woman who had once been her mother-in-law, a woman who was now homeless. "Tell me when and where," she said. The courtroom felt different the second time. The air was charged. Mr. Henderson was still wearing a rumpled suit, but he stood straighter. He had the binder on the table in front of him. Mark was there this time. He sat beside his lawyer, looking bored, checking his watch. He didn't look at me. He was treating this hearing like a traffic ticket. "Your Honor," Henderson began, "we would like to introduce a new witness and a motion to admit evidence establishing a pattern of predatory behavior under Federal Rule of Evidence 404B. Mark's lawyer jumped up. "Objection, irrelevant, character assassination." "It goes to intent, Your Honor," Henderson said, his voice ringing out. "It proves that the defendant did not act in good faith. It proves that the quitclaim deed was the weapon in a premeditated assault." The judge looked intrigued. "I'll allow it. Call your witness." When Sarah walked into the courtroom, the air left the room. Mark froze. For the first time, his composure cracked. He sat up straight, his face draining of color. He whispered something frantic to his lawyer. The lawyer looked confused. Sarah sat in the witness box. She was trembling, but her voice was clear. She laid it all out: the grandmother, the lies about the foundation, the exact same phrases: asset protection, family trust, let me carry the burden. "He told me he was doing it out of love," Sarah told the court. "He told me he was the only one who could fix it." Then Henderson played the video, Mark's video, again, but this time the context was different. Mrs. Clark Haven asked when I took the stand, "When you said everything is yours, what did you think was happening?" "I thought I was signing a paper to keep the taxman away," I said, looking directly at my son. "I thought I was trusting my child. I didn't know I was feeding a monster." Mark's lawyer tried to cross-examine, but the damage was done. The happy video no longer looked like consent. It looked like a hunter posing with his kill. The judge took a recess. It lasted an hour. When she returned, she didn't look at the lawyers. She looked at Mark. "Mr. Clark," Henderson said, "the law protects property rights fiercely, but it protects the vulnerable from fraud even more fiercely. The testimony of Miss Jenkins establishes a clear modus operandi. You utilized your position of trust to deceive your mother for personal financial gain." He banged the gavel. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. "The quitclaim deed is hereby voided ab initio due to fraud in the inducement. Title reverse immediately to Evelyn Clark. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into elder abuse and grand larceny." Mark stood up. "You can't do this. The money's gone. The lenders—" "The lenders can take it up with you, Mr. Clark," the judge said icily, "and I suggest you get a criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one." Mark turned to look at me. His eyes were wide, panicked, pleading. The boy who broke the window. "Mom, fix it." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't reach out. I turned my back. The locksmith came at 9 a.m. on a Monday. It was the same locksmith who had drilled the lock 3 months ago. He didn't say anything. He knew. In a small town or a big city that acts like one, everyone knows. He installed a heavy deadbolt, solid brass, reinforced strike plate. I stood on the porch. The for sale sign was gone, leaving a jagged scar in the mud of the front lawn. The house was mine again, but it wasn't the same. The mortgage was gone, yes, but the predatory loan Mark had taken out was a mess I would be cleaning up for years. The legal fees were astronomical. I would have to take in a boarder, maybe 2. I would be teaching tutoring sessions at the library till I was 80. I walked inside. The house was cold. It still smelled faintly of Mark's cologne, that sharp, metallic sandalwood. I opened the windows, letting the wet, cold Portland air rush in to scrub it clean. I am not the woman who lived here before. That woman was a history teacher who believed that facts were enough. That woman believed that blood was thicker than water. I know now that blood is just a liquid, and like any liquid, it can be spilled, it can be sold. I walked to the front door. I looked out at the street. A silver car drove by, and I didn't flinch. I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the thumb turn of the new deadbolt. Click. It was a deep, solid sound. It sounded like a period at the end of a long, terrible sentence. "I'm home," I said to the silence, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a fortress.